Okay, guys, today we're going to continue where we left off, and this was our plan to build a class called person. Okay? And if you recall, classes consist of properties and methods, things about it and things it can do. Here are what we said we were going to create in terms of things about it. So let's start writing some code for this. Okay? So jump back to C# or to NetBeans, and let's start by making a string to hold this person's name. Okay? Now, normally when you make variables, you then assign them a value. You say like name equals something. But now that we're moved on to classes, it's okay for properties of a class, which is what these variables are, to not have a starting value. They just sit like that with no actual value to them whatsoever. That's just fine. Okay? Now let's go to our next one. Int age. Okay? So again, this is a number to track this person's name, or pardon me, age. Now the next one is a Boolean because it's basically two values. Okay? And I could say gender. That could be what I call it, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit. If we think to the future, we're going to write lines of code that say things like gender equals true. And to me, that's a little confusing. What does that mean? Does that mean they're a boy or a girl or what, right? So often, Booleans, the name of Booleans is kind of like a question. And that's the way I'm going to say. I'm going to say that this thing, is it a male? And if I say is male is true, you probably can figure out what gender this person is, right? If I say is male is false, same thing. And we're going to use that same logic for the next one. A Boolean is alive, which again is going to be true or false in our code, and it'll be very clear kind of what that means. Is this person alive or not? That is a true-false answer. Okay, so that's what we had here. Name, age, gender, and alive. These are properties, and they're basically just variables like we just wrote. Now come our actions, our methods. So we're going to write these as methods. Born, die, talk, birthday. Okay? So under there, we're going to start writing these. Now, we know a little bit about how to write a method. We know that you have to put things like private, static, void, da, 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 da. But with classes, you can actually simplify it a little bit. And instead of the word private, we're going to use the word public. Void, born. So with methods, we know we have to write a couple more things to make it code. We have to put the curly brackets. Now, we don't have to put anything inside the method yet. We're just going to make what it looks like. So public void born. Okay? Now, that might change. We might later realize that this method does have to return something. But for now, we're just outlining that this is an action that a person has. We have to write it in code, so we have to write a few things there. This word we're going to spend a little more time on in this unit. Like, there's a difference between public and private, and we're going to talk about that. Okay, so that's coming up in the unit. We're going to be talking about that. Okay, all right, let's write the next one. Public void die. Okay, so you can be born, you can die. Again, we're not going to say how to do it yet. We're just going to put the method there as an empty method with a spot where we can fill it in later. Okay, now talk. Public void talk. And then finally, public void birthday. Okay, so there's our four methods. Born, die, talk, birthday. Okay, now we have experience writing methods, so this isn't that hard because we've just spent a couple units writing methods. So we know how they're written in terms of code. We're now applying them to something inside the class. So the class now has properties and methods, just like our plan said it would. Okay? And now we kind of know what the methods need to do. Set a person to be alive, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So why don't we work in reverse order? Let's write the birthday method right now. How could we increase the age by 1? Any ideas? Okay, but we already have age up here. It's already created. And if it's created up here, it's a global variable. All the methods already can see it. So all we need to do is increase that variable by 1 down here in the birthday method. So why don't we just do this? Age plus plus. That means age equals age plus 1. There we go. So now I've increased my age by 1 with my birthday. Done. That method's done. Okay? Let's go up to the talk method. Now, talking, in this case, let's do that by using a display on the screen. So let's use a S out, and let's have the person talk this way by printing it out to the screen. Again, this is a little bit of code, but it's certainly code we're comfortable with. We've been using it before. So what should we have our person say? We could have them say literally anything, but why don't we at least have them say information about who they are? Because we're storing information about who they are, okay? So how about we start with the words, I am, and then attach to that their name, and attach to that, and I am, attach to that their age, and attach to that years old. Okay? So again, imagine that we actually had a real person. It would be, I am Dave, and I am 7 years old. Okay? And now let's output their gender. Now, we don't want to output the word true, false. That seems weird. So why don't we write a little bit more, like something like this. And if, you are wondering if I am a male, comma, the answer is, and then I'm going to attach is male. Okay? So let's imagine again that this is going down. It says, I am Dave, and I am 7 years old, and if you are wondering if I'm a male, the answer is true. Okay? I am Sally, I am 20 years old, and if you're wondering if I'm a male, the answer is false. That's a pretty good thing for a person to say when they're talking. Okay? Now I know I kind of squeeze a lot of text on there, but I think you guys get the idea, right? Like how that can go. Just watch your spaces, but once we get to testing this, we'll see this in action. Okay. Let me take a pause here. Okay, so now we've actually completed 2 of our tasks. If we look at our task board here, birthday increases the age by 1. Talk relays information to the screen. Let's move up to die. It sets the person to be not alive. Okay, we can do that. To make them not alive, up here in the die method, well, we have a variable that tracks whether they're alive, and it's a switch. It's basically switched to true or false. So let's switch it to false. Is alive equals false. And actually that makes an interesting point now, I think to myself. You know what? Alive should be a property of talking. We shouldn't be able to talk unless we're alive. So let's go down to the talk method for a second and change up the code a little bit. Let's add a if statement to it. If it is alive, we'll put brackets around this code and say, you know what, you will only talk if you are alive. So notice what I did there? I've put a bracket around it that says, only if you're alive will I actually do this output. So this is now being controlled by an if statement. And if I call die and set alive to false, then this won't happen. But actually, I'm going to put an else in there as well. And I'm going to do something fun. I'm just going to go boo. It's like a ghost, right? Boo. That's the ghost. So that's what's going to happen when the dead person talks. Okay, so if they're alive, this gets outputted. If they're not alive, this gets outputted. By the way, notice the way I wrote this if statement? Just a little shorthand. I could say is alive equals true. But in an if statement, you actually don't have to do that with a Boolean because it assumes that it's going to check to true, false anyways. And that actually reads quite nicely, right? If is alive. That actually almost sounds like real speaking. It's still a little stunted, but the code is now kind of fitting the real world a little bit better. Okay, so there's talk, die, and birthday, all done. One left to go. And let's take a look at our list. So birthday, check. Talk, check. Die, check. Name, age, gender, alive, check. Only thing left is to actually set the person to be alive and set their starting age. But before we write that method, I want to update where we are right now in creating our class. So this is in our notes, in our slide notes. In creating a class, okay, Java is what's called an object-oriented programming language that uses classes. Other object-oriented programming languages include C++, Python, Ruby, Scala, there's lots, C#. A class, as we know, is a set of properties and methods that is classified within our project. You can add new files to your project, and those new files can be classes, and we did that, and we saw that happening in NetBeans. Okay, here's the thing though, I don't know if you noticed this. The name of your class, when you created it, also matches exactly the name that it shows up in the code. Letter by letter, it's exactly the same. This is usually done for you, so you don't have to worry about it, but I just want to make note that that is happening. Now, classes, unlike variables and methods, start with a capital letter. That's how we know they are classes. It's a little clue in our code. Okay, and now the class is part of your project. Okay. And those things have to match. So now we started adding properties, and we did the exact same thing that's in the slide notes. We added those properties, and they are essentially global variables within the class. They are global variables. Then we added methods, and we did this as well. We wrote born, die, talk, and birthday. But I want to stop and examine that method born. Okay? Born is essentially what we assumed is the case when you create a person. That's what being born means. And the thing about classes is they usually have a method that does this automatically. It's a special method that is used when you create a class, or specifically an object. And it's called a constructor method. That's the name of this type of method. It's the method that is used when you construct an object. So that's why it's called a constructor method. Okay, and that was what our born method was going to do. Okay? It was going to create a person, set them to be alive and their age to 0, which is when we would be instantiating, that's when we'd be creating an actual person and turning them into an object or instantiating the object. Okay? This is something that classes do. They use this when they construct something. And you've actually seen code like this before, especially Alex, you who took my grade 10 course. You may remember code like this, random, random equals new random. This is interesting because random is the class. This version of random is the object. But over here, you're seeing that thing again, but round brackets. And round brackets usually indicate a method. And that's what's happening here. We are specifically hinting that a special method is being called, and that method is a constructor method. Okay? So, that is what is happening. Oops, let me just pull that back up again. The constructor method is always called when you instantiate a class. But constructor methods are written a special way. So I'm just going to show you the rules for them, and then we're going to do it. Here are the distinctions between constructor methods and regular methods. 1, the name of the constructor method is the same name as the class. So our method's going to be called person, which is weird because that's what the class is called. But that's how it knows it's a constructor method. Which means, number 2, it starts with a capital letter, which usually breaks the rules. Methods usually start in a lowercase letter, but constructors are different. And 3, and this is the most important point, it has no return type, not even the word void. So you literally leave that spot blank. Okay? By writing the methods this way, it knows it's a constructor method, and then it calls it when you create the class. So let's go to our code and change our method called born into a constructor method. So 1, we have to rename it the same name as the class. So person, including a capital P. So don't call it born anymore, call it person, so it matches this exactly. The exact same spelling, perfectly. And then finally, the word void goes. We leave it like that. Public person, no return type at all. This now makes it a constructor method. So I'm going to comment that. I'm going to write a comment for that. That this is my constructor method. Okay? Constructor methods are called when you create the class, which is what born was supposed to do. So we're just replacing the word with a word that's more in line with the code. Okay. So let's think about what happens when a person is born. These 4 properties need to be given a starting value. Okay? We'll leave name for a second. Let's do age first. What should the age be when you're born?
0.
You want it to be 0? Is it always 0? Not in all cultures, actually. In Korea, for example, you're born 1. But we'll put that aside. Okay. Is male? Well, this one we could do either one. But actually, I'm going to rely on people who've taken biology in this class. Has anyone taken bio at all? Nobody in this room has taken bio? Maybe you just know this as a fact then, because it is a fact. Biologically, as humans develop inside their development stages, inside of a woman when she's pregnant, we actually all start off as one gender, and then over time, the two sexes divide into different genders. Do any of you know what the starting gender of all of us was? Female is correct. Now, to make you feel better, Dawson, I'll say we evolved into males at that point, and to make Bryn not be totally offended like she usually is in this class, I'll say the rest of us, and you too, Rain, devolved into males. But we actually all started off as female. So let's write our code that way. Is male equals false. Let's assume that they're not a male. Is alive. Oh, okay, that's easy. When you're born, that's set to true. And what about the name? We could leave the name blank, but let's pretend like this is like one of those cop shows, and it's like at the morgue. They don't know who it is, so let's use Jane Doe. Jane Doe. There. That's the name of this person. We don't know what their actual name is, but we're going to call them Jane Doe. Why Jane? Because it's a female, right? Jane Doe will be our person. So this is now our constructor method. The constructor sets these properties right at the start. Okay? So age 0, is male false, is alive true, name is Jane Doe. We now have kind of the whole class done. Look at this. We did everything we said we were going to do in this list. I can check this off now too. We wrote the blueprint to a person. That's exciting. You guys just made a person. I feel like this should be health class, and I should be explaining how you make a person, but no, I don't want to do that. That would be weird and awkward. But it's very exciting. It's like your first child, kids. You've just made a person for the first time. All right. This is also in the slide notes. It explains the constructor, whoops, and how we set properties. There it is right in the notes. Okay. Now, what we now need to do is actually make a person. This is the blueprint, but we haven't actually made a person. So here's now where we're going to have the 2 classes communicate with one another. Because if you look back in our package here, we had the person class, but our original class is still here, the example. So we're going to jump back to that original one now. Let's jump back to the example. And right here was where we're going to put that code for classes. So right here, under intro, methods, and arrays, and by the way, I don't want those to run when I run this, so I'm going to take these and comment them out. But right here, let's make a person, right inside of main. Okay, so here's how we do it. Person, okay, capital P. Now Java knows what this is. If you normally wrote this, it would go, oh, this is an error, I don't know what this is. But it actually knows what this class is because we defined it. All right, what should we call our person? I know you can't think of a name. How about just person? Equals a new person. Okay? We just created an object. And if I run this code, nothing's going to happen. But it does actually successfully run this code. All right, so just before we wrap up today with you guys, let me just explain what we just wrote. constructor methods are called or invoked whenever you construct an instance of a class or an object. So by writing that line that we just wrote, this is the class, and this is the object or the instance. And then on the rest of that line, that is where it called the constructor method that we wrote. So that's what it did. Now, in tomorrow's lesson, I'm going to show you that you can actually make more than one constructor. By the way, don't read up here. The answer's up there. What's that called when you have two methods with the same name but different parameters? Overloading. Right. So in other words, we can overload the constructor. I know the answer was up there, but all right. Now, actually, quickly before we leave, now that we have a person, let's do this. We can say, hey, person, dot, and by clicking the dot, look what pops up. What pops up are all my properties, age, is life, and all my methods, birthday, die, and talk. That's the one I actually want to call. I want to call the talk method of this class. So I'm saying, hey, person, talk. And if I play this, let's see what happens. I am Jane Doe. I am 0 years old. And if you're wondering if I am a male, the answer is false. You kids literally made a person today. And that's where I'll stop today's video. Make sure you hit that big, juicy subscribe button. Oh, God. That's just awful. You kids make me feel dirty when I do that now.